Okay, so let's talk about the syntax. Really, what Ross calls this the syntax of the imperfect. It's really the semantics of it. In other words, how are we going to translate the imperfect verb forms when we come to them? Remember, the imperfect conjugation seems to be indicating verbal activity that is not being portrayed as complete. Okay, there's no reference made to its end at all. Now, probably the most common way we're going to translate this is as future, and that's why it's number one. So, and that's why we've translated almost all these forms with just a simple future tense in English. He will do something. Okay, so he will appoint. The second more common common way to translate it will be for, this is number two, continuous or repeated action. Action that is continuous or in process. Someone is doing it and in the middle of doing it, or the action is done. It might stop, but someone does it again and again and again. That is to say, it's action that's done in a repeated way or a habitual way. So, here's the deal with the imperfect. This kind of action could be past tense action that's progressive or habitual, or it could be present tense action that's progressive or habitual. Okay? We could use either of those English tenses to translate it. So let's look at some ideas here. If I were wanting to say that something was going on right now and in process, I might say something like this: John is playing, right? John is playing. And the imperfect conjugation could be used for that kind of action. John is playing. In the past tense, if I wanted to indicate that John was in the process of doing this activity, I could say John was playing, right? Oops. There we go. John was playing. That would mean what? That would mean that as I conceive of John doing that action, in my mind's eye, he is literally in the process of playing a game. John was playing. John was playing when the car struck him, right? But what if, I know, all of my examples tend to be sort of horrific, but it's one of the liabilities of teaching. But what if I want to say not that John was in the middle of playing in the past, but rather that John in the past did something on a normal basis? Like every Thursday, it was his habit to play tennis. Then I might say something like this: on Thursdays, John, I wouldn't say was playing. I would say John would play tennis, right? That's how we would do that in English. So for past tense, in process, John was playing. Habitual or repeated action, in the past, John would play. Okay? In the present, if it's in process, John is playing. On the other hand, if I said or asked the question, hey, what does John normally do on Thursdays? Then you would say something like, John plays tennis on Thursdays, right? So the simple present in English could encapsulate the repeated or habitual idea. The Hebrew imperfect conjugation pattern form can be used for any of these things, okay? So even though we will frequently translate them as future, just be aware, if the context is clearly past, then we're going to resort to one of these past tense sorts of patterns. Okay, and then in the third example, we have what are called modal uses. Modal uses. And here, as Ross describes, the imperfect conjugation may represent action that is not in the indicative mood, where it's a statement of fact, but rather a statement of what might happen, or could happen, or should happen, or must happen. And we use in English what are called modal auxiliary verbs. Modal auxiliary verbs. I used the word auxiliary verb with my kids the other day when we were doing a Latin lesson. They had no idea what I was talking about because they know the word helping verb, okay? So if you don't know auxiliary verb, basically it's a helping verb, okay? But the modal auxiliary verbs are the ones that provide these sort of nuances of possibility, probability, contingency, may, maybe not, possible, possibly not, that sort of thing, okay? So Yishma, if I wanted to translate this with a simple future, it would be what? He will hear, right? If it was clearly past tense, then I could translate that as he was hearing, right? But if I wanted to say, hey, John, it's really important that that you listen. And then I say Yishma, John, that mean or Tishma, that would mean you maybe must listen. Okay? So in a modal sort of context, then I could translate Yishma as he must hear, or John, he should hear, right? So if I'm imposing an obligation on him, I'm not saying that he is actually hearing. I'm saying that he ought to. He may hear or might hear. He would hear. Okay, so any of these modal auxiliary verbs are also possible for ways of rendering the imperfect. And your context is going to be the determining factor in this sort of thing. So that's how we're going to handle the imperfect. All right, now 17.4, we meet an item called the directive hey. Not mounts. Ross calls this the directive hey, and I also like to refer to this as the directional hey. Now, what is this? This is a final, unstressed comet's hey. So we have seen comet's hey on the end of words before. That usually indicates that it's a particular gender and number, right? You see a noun with a comet's hey, what do you think its gender and number is? Think susa, feminine singular, right? But where is the stress on feminine singular endings like that? Sus, susa. Ish, isha. It's on the end when it's a feminine singular comet's hey marking, right? This comet's hey is unstressed. It's unstressed. It's not stressed. And so that's how you can tell the difference between the other kind of comet's hey. And whatever it's attached to, it has the semantics of usually motion toward whatever it's attached to. So let's think about some examples here. The word yam means see, and that's the normal form of the word for see, yam. So what if I attach a comet's hey to it, but unstressed? That is to say, the yam keeps its stress on the ya, and it becomes yama. Yama. What does that mean? Oh, and there's going to be a dogish forte there in that mem. It means to see. Or, and this is another way to think of it, adding the unstressed comet's hey is like adding the suffix ward to a word. Home, homeward, right? See, sea word means what? To the sea. That's right. Good. So, another example. Ha'ir. What does ha'ir mean? The city. Ha'ira. Unstressed, added comet's hey to the end means to or toward the city. Got it? See how this works? So, normally I'd use a prepositional phrase, el or le somewhere. But I could also just add an unaccented comet's hey. Now, here's one of the difficulties. We have the word give a, which means, it could be the place name Gibeah, which is give a is Hebrew for hill. Okay, what if I have a word that already ends with a feminine singular comma te, and then I want to add a directive comma te? Can I add a vowel to a mater, hey, that isn't a real hey anyway? No. So what I have to do is I have to change this to a form at the end that can take an ending. And if you remember, Susa, horse, when we wanted to say his horse, we had to change it to Susat, and then we add the pronoun, Susato. And that's what's going to happen here. Give a is going to become give at. So give atta. Now notice the unaccented comma te here is the directive hey. The at here is the feminine singular marker. Okay? So how would I translate this? Give atta to Gibeah. He went to Gibeah. He went give atta. All right? So that's the directive hey. So you'll see that in your homework, and you'll see it in the Hebrew Bible. The last thing that we see in our lesson is 17.5. This is Ross, page 133. Is relative clause with resumption. Relative clause with resumption. That is to say, in the relative clause in Hebrew, often the head noun that the relative clause modifies is resumed with some pronoun inside the relative clause. Let's remind ourselves about relative clauses in Hebrew. Relative clauses begin with the word asher in Hebrew, right? Asher. And whenever we see an asher, we know that a relative clause is there. We're going to begin our translation of the relative clause with who, which, or that. This is the man who came to dinner. This is the dog that bit my foot, and so forth. So look at my example here. I have Gedolah ha'isha. What does that mean? Gedolah ha'isha. Is this an attributive adjective? Where do attributive adjectives go? They go after. Remember a, attributive, a after. Attributives go after. So this is actually a predicate use of the adjective. So great is the woman. And then the asher clause is telling me something about the woman, right? Now, what do we call the noun that's being modified by the asher relative clause? We call that the head noun or the antecedent. Okay? And the whole relative clause modifies it. What is it about the woman that is great? Great is the woman who, asher, kathavti. What does kathav mean? To write. Kathavti. Who did the writing here? It's one CS, personal ending. Who I wrote, Cal perfect, la, lamed preposition, plus, what pronoun is this? Think long and hard. Third, feminine, singular. Lo, la. Remember good old Lola? Lo, la, to him, to her. Lacha, lach, to you. Li, to me. So lo, la. La is to her. Okay? Who does that third feminine singular pronoun refer to? It refers to ha'isha, to the woman. This is what we call a resumptive pronoun. The resumptive pronoun refers back to the head. Now, in English, this does not sound like very good English, right? Great is the woman who I wrote to her. How would we say that in good English? Great is the woman to whom I wrote. Okay? So this is not great English, but it's very sexy Hebrew. Okay? Using resumptive pronouns like this. It sounds funny to us, but it is. It's very common in Hebrew. Okay, so great is the woman which I wrote to her. Okay, So one of the things that I told you was that in relative clauses, back when we first started learning about relative clauses, you have a head noun that the relative clause modifies, and that head always has a resumptive function inside the relative clause too. So the head noun, whoever that refers to, will have a role outside the clause, relative clause, and a role inside the relative clause. And when that role is overtly stated, it comes in the form of a resumptive pronoun. Okay? Now, if you look at the example on page 133, we have one more that's like this, except instead of using a pronoun, it uses what I like to call a pro-adverb. Ze hamakom, this is the place, asher yashav, which he sat, sham, there. This is the place which he sat there. That's funny sounding English. In normal English, we would say this is the place where he sat. That sham is resumptive. What's it resuming? It's resuming the Hebrew word place, hamakom, right? This is the place which he sat there, i.e. in that place. So you will see resumptive adverbs and pronouns in your relative clauses in Hebrew. So there you go.